Cassandra wasn't sure what to expect from the bread she had received from the Knox bakery. She thought the taste would be quite different compared to the bread in her current timeline. The more she thought about it, however, she had never actually had fresh bread from an actual bakery. Only the stuff out of a bag, mass-produced, pre-sliced and from a supermarket. So she didn't have a fair comparison. The loaf was still warm, as she began tearing off small pieces and popping them into her mouth. It was soft and airy, and the smell certainly matched the taste. Delicious. They were sat on a wall a few blocks from the bakery. Maud watched as she ate. Although the smell made her mouth water, she knew she wouldn't be able to taste the bread. Her need for food was lost a long time ago. The smell was quite enough to satisfy her memories of the once desirable meal. Cassandra swallowed her mouthful of bread and turned to Maud as a sudden thought rattled around her brain. That woman said your whole family died. And you said you were an aunt of mine. Does that mean you had a sibling that no one knew about? Maud smiled as she watched her savaging the loaf, pulling off chunks with her fingers. I wish you'd stop with your questions. Okay, I'll assume then. I'm guessing it was a brother. So that would make him a great-great-great-grandfather. Or something. Cassandra mumbled through the mouthful of dough as she continued to eat. Give or take a few grates, Maud said with a slight laugh. Unfortunately, if he ever returns, he's going to be in for a shock. The only person still alive that was close to him is... She cut off instantly. She lost control of what she was saying and began to trail off, a mistake she wasn't willing to make. Cassandra could see her visibly flinching, as if she was awaiting punishment. Maud? She reached out towards her, gently placing her hand on her shoulder. It's okay, I'm sorry I asked. Maud looked at Cassandra's hand perched on her arm, as she slowly eased herself into a more relaxed state again. No, it's not your fault. You're easy to talk to. I should know by now what I can and can't say, she said, slowly pushing herself up from the wall. I'm just gonna go for a little stroll. Will you be okay waiting here while I clear my head? I won't go far. If you need me, just shout. Sure. Take your time. Cassandra smiled, returning her attention to the half-eaten chunk of bread. Maud slowly wandered off around the corner into an alleyway, a couple of rats making their way out as she entered. Cassandra watched as they scampered along the cobbles. Rats didn't bother her. There was only one thing she feared. Although it was an unavoidable thing that would come to everyone eventually, she always feared the end of life. Mainly having to live without the people she loved, but also the fear of her own eventual death. She was only 27, but the thought was never far from her mind. And since her mother's passing, she had even started to have awful dreams about it. She shook the thoughts from her head as she finished the last of the loaf, rubbing the crumbs from her fingers onto the old dress. As she brushed her hands vigorously across the fabric, something caught her eye, an old torn scrap of paper sticking out of the pocket on the adjacent side from where she had pulled the coins from. She began to pull it out slowly by the corner, while peering over at the alleyway. She was pleased to see that Maud was still out of sight, not knowing how she would react if she saw Cassandra going through her old belongings. With a sense of caution, she unfolded the small scrap of parchment and began to read what was written on it. It was numbers, all numbers, and there was no indication of what they might have meant, but obviously they meant something to Maud. Knowing she wouldn't be able to tell her what they were for, Cassandra began to return the paper to the pouch, but she stopped as she saw a name written on the other side as she folded it. Baxter Fulmore. She wondered if he was the person that Maud's brother was close to, the one she couldn't mention. Did he have something to do with her death? She quickly returned the paper to her pocket, as her eyes flicked to and from the alleyway, patiently awaiting Maud's return. She daredn't move from the spot she was in case she got lost amongst the crowds, so she let her eyes wander for her. She thought of the information she had collected so far. Maud's family died from an illness. Symptoms were awful and hard to miss. However, Maud showed no symptoms but died anyway. Her brother seemed to be missing, or in other ways out of the picture, before the illness took hold of the family and didn't return, at least not before Maud died. Now this Baxter person was sending Maud random numbers. As her thoughts were in full swing, a hand was suddenly placed on her shoulder. Startled, she jumped up from the wall. Maud stood beside her, returning from her stroll in a much better mood. Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you, she laughed. You look deep in thought. Anything you want to know? Cassandra hummed to herself, considering whether or not to mention the name on the paper. She knew it would be a waste of time, so she kept the newly obtained information to herself. Nothing you can tell me without breaking your rules, she replied. How was your walk? I went to see the house. It's odd seeing another family living there. It's as if we never lived there at all. Silly, really. I knew the world wouldn't stop functioning just because of my death, of course. It just feels strange to see it carrying on so normal. Cassandra didn't reply. She was on the other side of the feeling that Maud had just described. In her current position, she did in fact feel like her world had stopped spinning. As Maud mentioned during their earlier conversation, she had nothing to lose. During recent years, she had become what she considered to be a lost cause, a mere lipstick stain on the glass of society, getting through life, just surviving and nothing more. No job, quite soon possibly nowhere to live, and in the last few years she had probably drank enough to flood a small village. The thoughts stung not only because they were self-inflicted, but because she knew that was the only way she thought of herself. She was unable to pick out anything good. Maud had unknowingly just set a fire within Cassandra's brain, a fire that had been smouldering for a while. She needed to add some meaning back to her empty life, and she promised herself then and there, when all this was over, she was going to prove that she could turn her life around. Ending up in a situation similar to Maud's wasn't an option. She had been alone for centuries, living in darkness, afraid of letting a conversation become too in-depth due to the fear of losing limbs. She couldn't even begin to imagine what that would feel like, having no one, lifetime after lifetime, watching the world go by without her. Cassandra wondered why there was no one Maud felt that she could talk to while she was alive, no one she could share her story with. What happened that was so obscene, so secretive that she couldn't tell anyone?